So thank you. Mike Murray is just absolutely phenomenal, and this is his third year presenting for me because I find that a lot of the career tracks really talk at sort of an entry level or a basic level, and there are many of us in the community who really need to sort of have that extra oomph midway in our career, or what do we want to do to move beyond into management, or we're trying to talk about other issues in our mind than just pen testing or blue team or red team. So Mike comes up with a new wonderful topic each year, and then this year it sounds like we ended up having coffee about 15 minutes ago, and he totally changed his presentation based on that. So with that, Mike Murray.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. All right. Technology. All right. So, seriously. Actually, before I start, can we do another round of applause for Kathleen? She is amazing and really the driving force behind this whole thing. And to me, so I've told her this before, but I'm going to say this in front of everybody. This is literally my favorite talk I get to do all year. And I talk a lot, right? I talk at a lot of conferences. I talk about a lot of things. But this is one of the few where I really get to feel like I'm giving back. And it's a lot of war stories and a lot of the things that I've learned over, oh wow, I'm old, over almost 20 years of managing insecurity. And as Kathleen said, each year I've sort of shifted the talk. This year I had an entire plan. And I got to 2 days ago, and I realized that I didn't like anything I was saying, so I completely rewrote this from scratch. So you guys are getting a very different presentation than I've ever given before, because I've noticed a pattern or two in the industry that I really want to call out, and I really want to talk about, and I really want to point out. At the same time, I'm not here to espouse, really. I'm here for all of you. So I plan on it. This is an hour, but I plan on only going probably 25 to 30 minutes because each of the last 2 years that I've done this, we've spent more time on questions and answers and interesting, just, you know, whatever problems you all are having than whatever I want to talk about. And I like that format. I like being able to hear what you all want and what you're all thinking. So we're going to do the same thing. And I have to start this meeting with a caveat because we're live streaming. So, and I'm going to tell a story about what happened to me last year. So I got up here last year, and I did what I think was the weirdest, most boring security talk ever at any conference. I did an entire talk on how to have meetings, which I'm a management nerd, guys. I like that kind of stuff. I like thinking about how to have good meetings. And what was really awesome is I spent a bunch of time talking about how important one-on-one meetings are. And before I even got off the stage, there was a Slack message from one of my junior employees that said, "Why don't you ever have one-on-ones with me?" So I'm going to say it up front. Look, managing is hard, and it is hard to do all the things that I'm going to talk about well. And I will promise you, I don't do them well even after 20 years. This stuff's really hard. Honestly, I got into management because I love, I'm probably a lot like most of you guys. Though it seems like I'm an extrovert and I'm very outgoing and effusive if you see me at a party, I'm actually really shy, and I really would rather just be sitting in a corner with my laptop and my headphones on than actually dealing with or talking to people. And so this stuff's hard for me. And it's actually, I think because it's hard for me is why I want to teach it. None of this is actually ever easy. And so to talk about how to get teams in this industry to do well, I think it's a really important set of topics for anybody who wants to go into management. So actually, before I even start, how many of you think you want to be a manager someday? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm glad you're here. I hope at least one of you I talk out of it. And that's not because management is not fulfilling. It is. It's actually, I will tell you, the best things I've ever done in my career are through other people, not through things that I came up with. And the things that I am most proud of are the days that I actually just sat there while someone else did the work, but I knew I had prepared them to do that work, and they kicked a lot of ass, and I just really got to sit there and buy pizza. Like, that's a great day for me. But it's hard to get there, and all the other days where it doesn't happen like that are really unfortunate. But to that, I want to talk about some of the things that make management in InfoSec, and especially high-end InfoSec. So when I say high-end InfoSec, you go around Black Hat and DEF CON and you see some of these talks and you realize that someone is literally talking about how to do some crazy cosmic ray bit flip of a register in a CPU that you've never heard of. Managing those people, right? Because they're a very unique breed, and this industry breeds a type of people that actually, I tell any first-time manager in security that if you learn to manage security people well, you can pretty much manage anyone. Because we are the hardest, first of all, I think we're the hardest industry in the world to have a sustainable career in. And on the other side of that, we're the hardest industry in the world to make sure that other people under us have a sustainable career in. And it's funny, because to me, it's not a feature. Or sorry, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And it's a feature of the industry. The industry itself is set up so that the career is really hard to maintain and management is even harder. So let me ask you guys a question. How many of you have been strictly in security? Security job only, not product management, not marketing, not sales engineering, for more than 10 years? Good, that's about half the audience. Now, how of that half of you, of the people you started with, how many of the people on your first teams, more than 50% of them are still in the industry? Really? So about half of them. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and on my first 3 teams, I think about 10% of those people are still in security. That's not true of other industries, and there's a reason why. And we don't often think about what it means. We think about what it means when we talk about security a lot. If you go just look at the talk roster at Black Hat this year versus the talk roster at Black Hat in 2012, you will notice the talks are about completely different subjects, right? The word SecDevOps is everywhere this year. That word didn't even exist 2 years ago, and now it's the main focus of this conference. And there's a reason for it, and it's fundamentally baked into the industry. Anybody know what the technology lifecycle is? Okay, so first of all, anybody ever read Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm? Okay, seminal book. If you want to be in management, if you want to understand business in technology, you must read that book. It is absolutely required. It's a little old now. It was written in 2001. But Moore actually talked a lot about the technology lifecycle. And basically the idea is that as a technology goes through its maturity, it has a bell curve lifecycle. Looks kind of like this, right? And in the early days of a technology, nobody uses it, right? This is basically the axis on the left here is the number of people who actually use the technology. And sort of on day one, right, actually it's more like day 0 because this is like early alphas and early betas, you have this tiny fragment of people who actually use the product, right? And over time, if the product is at all successful, then you get early adopters, right? These are the people who lined up outside the Apple Store for the very first iPhone, even though the stupid thing didn't actually let you send a text message or cut and paste, right? And those are the same people who are still lining up for it. Those are the people who got the iPhone X, even though I thought Face ID was the craziest idea I ever saw and really didn't want that technology. But still, a whole ton of people bought it, right? Then you get to the sort of early majority, when you really start to hear about the product. The late majority, which is sort of, you know, when my mom comes to me and says, "What's this iPad thing I've heard about?" And then finally, what's known as the laggards. I hope I don't offend too many government people, but anybody still on Windows XP, that's them, right? And you know, you see government, large companies, you know, older sort of non-technical businesses. This is sort of the curve of obsolescence of every technology. Now, here's the trick question for us. Across this life cycle, where do the security issues happen? Go say it. No. No, not at all. Not at all. When was the last time there was a massively significant vulnerability, like change the whole internet vulnerability in the TCP4 stack? At least, right? We're talking at least a decade. When was the last time there was a vulnerability in, I don't know, Apache Spark? Like yesterday, right? And actually, what the curve looks like, if you look about vulnerability distribution, is it looks like this, right? So when the product first comes out, the thing's Swiss cheese, because nobody, you know, the three people in the garage who just developed the technology, did they care about security at all? No, they're just trying to get the product out the door, right? The very first version of the technology always sucks, but nobody uses it, so there's no loss, right? You're not really worried about a hacker hacking your limited beta that you've only allowed 3 users to have. It's actually, what the interesting thing is as the technology matures and people start to use it, this is where the attackers really get interested, right? This is Facebook in 2005 when it was just, you know, Mark Zuckerberg in Harvard and nobody cared. This is Facebook in 2010 when suddenly everybody's doing the, oh no, I'm stuck in London, I just got hit over the head with a brick, please send me money. Everybody remembers the scams. There was this huge proliferation of stuff on social media around then. We spent all this time building social media protection products. There's companies still that are advertising social media security, you know, somewhere on the show floor, somewhere within 100 yards of here, I guarantee it. And this is where we spend almost all of our time. Now, what's interesting about that is the consequences it has for our careers and for our people. Because it means, so in general, for the most part, in today's world, if this was 5 years ago, I would quote you a different number. But in today's world, we have a new technology shift like this about every 3 years. And I use SecDevOps as an example right now. SecDevOps is sort of at this level of popularity right now. 3 years ago, lots of people sort of knew about it, and there was some whispered conversations in the hallway between the few thought leaders, but now everybody talks about it. By the way, 2 or 3 years from now, SecDevOps as an idea is going to be out here, and there's going to be one talk at this conference about SecDevOps because it's going to be widely accepted. Now, what this means for us as an industry is actually a huge problem. And to understand the problem, we have to talk about accounting. Not because I like talking about accounting, but so that you understand the pace of change in other industries. Innovations in accounting. So, CPA cert, 1896. GAT, the rules of accounting, the fundamental rules are called GAT, the generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. The GAAP rules do change a little bit every year, but fundamentally, GAP's pretty much been the same since 1939. If you learned GAAP in 1939, you could read a couple of articles and be up to speed on today. So in the last 60 or 70 years, your knowledge is stable. In the last 10 years of security, our life kind of looks like this. Oh, don't worry, it speeds up. And I'm probably a couple years behind. I know I forgot SecDevOps on here somewhere. You get the point. Our industry has evolved more in the last 10 years than accounting has since 1939, right? And so it leads us to this world where constant update and constant reinvention is required. We must continually learn. And my rule of thumb is really simple. Every 3 years, the most valuable thing in security changes. And I'm using SecDevOps as an example because that is, pretty much one of those things right now. If you're an expert in SecDevOps, you have lots to talk about, you have lots of things to write about, you have lots of conference talks to give, and you have lots of people who want to offer you a job. If you're an expert in protecting WPA2 on wireless networks, well, not so much, right? And yet in 2003, 15 years ago, if you were an expert on protecting WPA2 in wireless networks, does anybody know there was actually a certified wireless administrator certification? Okay, now that I've asked that, did any of you get it? I was hoping. No, I was literally hoping that there would be at least one person who got that cert. The point being, Something that was important enough that we made a certification for it 15 years ago is now not even a job. That's how fast this industry evolves. And so a lot of us end up like this. And the reason I asked the question about how many people that you started out with are still in security is because our level of attrition is so high. If you start out in the career path as an accountant, you generally are an accountant when you're 50, right? There are exceptions to that rule. But in security, it's the other way around. The people who've been around for 20 years, walk around here. How many people have actually done nothing but security for the last 20 years? Look, you guys are a very small handful, right? You're a very small handful of your peers. Yep. Okay, and I guarantee you're the only one in the room who's done that, right? Yeah, which I caught earlier, and I was like, that's a good T-shirt. I want one of those. But the idea that people don't stay in security for this long for a reason. So one of my favorite jokes ever made on the Black Hat stage, Scott Blake did a talk, and for those of you who remember Scott Blake, he started the Razor team at BindView. He was CISO at Liberty Mutual for a while. And Scott did a talk, I think it was in 2001, called Should You Hire Hackers? Were you there? So Scott opened the talk with my all-time favorite security dad joke. What's the difference between a hacker and a security professional? Time of day. Nice. Not a bad guess. A mortgage. And the fact that you all laugh means you all get that, right? Like that is actually true. There's a truth to that statement. And because of that, as soon as we want to grow up and not continue to reinvent ourselves every year and not continue to learn, by the way, I have ridiculous ADHD. Anybody who has ever hung out with me knows I'm always thinking about something new. I'm always learning something new. This industry works really well for me because after about 3 years of knowing something, I'm bored and want to learn something else. And so that's why I'm still here, is because this industry fits for that. If I had, at 27, decided I wanted to coast for the rest of my career, I would still probably be a pretty decent web app pen tester, but how useful a skill is that really, right? That skill obsoletes really fast. Whereas if I had learned accounting in school, I would still be a decent accountant. I might not be the best accountant in the world, but I'd still have a job. And this means that our industry has one trait that I think nobody talks about. Although actually, some people after me are going to talk about this, which I'm really excited this is becoming the topic of conversation this week. And we talk about it a lot. So my company, our headquarters is in San Francisco. Actually, any of you guys in tech in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley? A few of you? Okay, so the one thing that I've noticed, and you guys can confirm if you're seeing the same thing, but all of my friends are seeing the same thing. Rates of attrition on staff for security people in San Francisco range between 35 and 50% a year. So, and it's really interesting to me to talk to managers around me who haven't come from security, because if you didn't come from security, actually, our CEO is a brilliant man. He's done all this incredible business stuff over the years. And he said to me, so he's built tech companies in Boston on the East Coast, over many, many years. And he said, when I was growing up, if a CEO had 7% attrition, the board was asking them why they were terrible at their jobs. And he took over this company, and his first reaction is 30% attrition. Oh my goodness. And then people started telling him, oh, wow, you only have 30% attrition? Great work. Right? Because that is the new normal in security. And it's, by the way, it's not a bug. It's not a problem. It's actually a feature of everything I've been saying. If you have to reinvent your skills every 3 years, and you're in a job, 3 years from now, suddenly the skills you're learning may not apply to the job you're in anymore, right? And suddenly there's movement. We move a lot more than most industries. We have a lot of attrition. And I think the only way that we as an industry survive in the long term, you know, we all try and manage it. I bet if we talk to all the people at the back of the room, most of the organizations have ways to try and retain their people. And I'm looking at the B of A people who are nodding at this, right? And we work really hard to retain our people, but we also have to realize that kind of movement is actually a feature of this industry. And if you do that, then you realize you have to change what you do as a manager and a leader. Like, just think about it this way. If you knew every one of your employees would quit in the next 2 years, how would you change what you do? Would it change the way you manage, right? Of course it would. And the very first thing you would get good at is what? Hiring new people, right? Because if I know, and actually, my favorite mathematical equation. So say it takes me 90 days to recruit and onboard a new employee. I have a team of 4, and I expect 50% attrition. How many employees do I have on that team? I think your math's wrong. Yes. No, I don't. I have 3. Because if I have 50% attrition, which means 50% of the people are cycling out at all times, and every time that happens, I lose 90 days, over the course of each of those 4 people quitting, I lose 1 year over the course of 1 man year over the course of 2 years. I'm averaging. I'm not putting the variance in there. We do a much more detailed analysis, but just in general, the idea that you have a 4-person team, but you could only ever maximally expect a 3-person set of output out of that team. How many of your managers would say, I gave you 4 people, but really do 3 people's worth of work? That's not what we tell our managers. It's, you have 4 people. I don't care that one just quit. You still have 4 heads. You should be able to do 4 heads worth of work. Right, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with that. If, instead of it taking you 90 days to recruit those people, it takes you 7 days to recruit those people. And if you have a 7-day turnaround from the time that you lose that person to the time the new person starts, then you think I'm crazy. Every single person's looking at me like, that's impossible, Mike. No, it's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. I explain it to business executives this way. So we have a sales team, right? Those sales team, there's 35 of them. They're prospecting on 150 accounts. Why don't they just do 1 account at a time, or wait until they close a deal and then start on the next account? And they look at me like, that's stupid. Who would sell like that? But isn't that exactly what we do with recruiting? Almost across the industry, I get to start looking for the next person the day the person gives notice. That 90-day clock starts that day, right?
At least 3 days to create and post the rest.
Yeah, you're right. My best case scenario is I get to start that day. You're right. Then it has to go through HR approval, backfill approval, some sort of committee. Yeah, it usually takes a week or 2. And then my 90 days is 120 days. Right? And then I have 2.5 people across that team of 4. This is the point. The point is, if you know that you're in an industry where attrition is a natural part of the way things work, we have to change our recruiting. We have to be building pipeline in advance of actually needing the people, because, so it's one thing if you're in a company, like if I ran an accounting team and I expected 1 person to quit every 5 years, I could afford to lose 90 days when that person quits. If I expect half of my people to quit every year, or if I'm gonna really stretch it out and say, okay, I'm gonna be really great at keeping people, I'm gonna have 33% attrition, so I'm only gonna lose 1/3 of my people every year. Even still, if I have that, in order to maintain my productivity, I must be recruiting ahead of the plan. Right? I must be recruiting so that the day that person leaves or that happens, I am ready to move forward with the next hire as quickly as possible. And here's the problem. Nobody is good at recruiting. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm literally somebody who thinks about recruiting enough to stand up and talk about it. And I will tell you, I might have a 50% success rate of hiring great people. And the unfortunate part is, There's an old sporting maxim that says, best coach is the coach that has the best players, right? And that is true unequivocally about management. It does not matter how good a manager you are if all of your people are terrible. And that's where recruiting really comes in. But the problem is, how do we recruit? We get resumes, and then what we do? We interview them. How many people think interviewing works? Jameson's literally the only one with his hand up. Why? Because it doesn't. I would love to know. I'm going to take that offline because I'd like to hear about that. Because actually, I think you probably are going to know most of what I'm going to put in here. Because all the research says, and this is the most uncomfortable thing for any of us to accept, but I promise every single person in this room does it. All the research says that you make almost exactly the same decisions after the first 10 seconds as you do after 30 minutes. And the idea, I mean, if you thought about this as the case, if everybody just acknowledged this was true, all we could do is like a police lineup and decide who to hire. And guess what? We'd hire the same people. That's the scary part. The scary part is, if you turned your interviewing process into a police lineup, most of you would end up hiring the same folks. That's how strongly our unconscious process biases the recruiting process. So the problem is, there's not a better answer, right? There's no like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all the resumes, put them on a wall, and throw a dart at it. That might work, but I don't think any of our HR people would be okay if that was our process. So what do you do if you want to hire good people? The very first thing is you have to accept what I just said. Your brain is out to get you. Your brain will screw you up, and your brain will make sure that you hire exactly the wrong people. Most of us make a really screwy mistake. Most of us do one of two things, and we do it exquisitely. We are all so good at it. We either hire people exactly like us, or we hire people exactly the opposite of us. And one of my favorite quotes, I heard a psychologist named John Bradshaw say one time, 180 degrees from wrong is still wrong, right? Hiring somebody exactly like me is just as bad as hiring somebody exactly the opposite of me. And we all make that mistake. It's a built-in human bias, right? And we could go into the psychological reasons that we like people who are like us, or we hate ourselves, so we like people who are like the people we hate. There's a lot of deep-seated psychological stuff there that doesn't have a place in this talk, but it's true. And so if you actually want to interview well, and this is why, knowing Jameson a little, I bet he's actually solved some of this. To actually interview well, your job as an interviewer is to realize your mind is out to get you and to intentionally fight yourself. So my best way to do this is really simple. You have to write a real job description. Now, when I say a real job description, how many of you guys I'm sure most of you have a job description. If you actually went to work and did exactly what was on that paper, how would that work?
Maybe hiring someone else.
Yes.
Pretty well, because I wrote it.
Good job. But exactly, most of our job descriptions actually have nothing to do with our jobs, right? And we write these job descriptions that have all this crap on them, but what we're really, it's like, must have 8 years of this experience, and must know how to run Snort, and must know how to run Metasploit, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get to work, and you never touch Snort, you never touch Metasploit, and you spend all your time interacting with people and program managers, and you hate talking to people. And you're like, man, the hiring manager's like, he seems so great in the interview. Well, why? Well, we evaluated his Java skills, and we evaluated whether or not he could use Snort and Metasploit. And so we gave the person the job. The problem is, when the job description doesn't match what you actually are looking for, how are you making the decision? You're making the decision on unconscious bias. You're making all of your decisions on unconscious process. And so you literally could do the 15-second lineup and be equally as effective, because the criteria that you've primed yourself with, that you've set up yourself with, looks nothing like what will actually make the person successful at the job. And so you end up in this really screwy situation where the people you hire aren't effective, but you don't know why. Right? I'm a big believer that 90% of management is hiring the right people into the right roles and then getting out of their way. And if you don't get this step right, everything else gets hard. And if you get this step right, everything else gets easy. The problem is we're not wired to get this step right, so you have to work really hard at it. And it's ultimately about knowing more than what just goes on the paper for job descriptions. For those who are really interested and nerdy about this, there's a wonderful article in the Harvard Business Review about 15 years ago called The Portfolio Model of Human Capital. And the portfolio model of human capital basically is the best way to write that job description. It basically says there are a lot more to a person's job and to a team, to a set of people on a team, than what actually most of us write. Most of us, when we write a job description, we literally just sit down and we go, what skills and what kind of knowledge do they need to have? 8 years of Java experience, 14 years of DevOps, 36 years of understanding AES. Like, we write the skills down, but we don't write down the most important question. Who is that person? Are they an extrovert? You know what? If I'm going to hire an evangelist who goes out and speaks at conferences, I probably don't want to hire a shy introvert who's not very good at talking to people. And similarly, if I want to hire an amazing coder who's going to solve really hard technical problems, maybe like great sales skills is not what I'm looking for. But maybe it is. But we have to think it through. You also have to think about the team you have. So what they called it in the portfolio model was they called it the weirdness quotient. Every single company, I will tell you, so just a couple of career path jumps for me so you understand what I mean. I went to GE Healthcare, and I ran a team at GE Healthcare, and I hired a team of about 20 people. And all of them are, I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure all of them are still at GE. And they're all doing a great job. Then I went and I worked at Lookout. Now, you think, I hired the team of all these great people that I loved at GE, and I didn't bring any of them to Lookout. Why? Because the weirdness and the kind of person that fits in GE's culture probably doesn't want to fit in a Bay Area startup culture, right? Or might not fit in a Bay Area startup culture. And vice versa. You know, before I went to GE, I ran my own company. We were a 30-person security consulting firm. I didn't take many of them to GE with me either, because that's also a very different set of weirdness. Actually, funny story about my GE employment. 3 weeks into GE, and I have to come out so you guys can see what this was actually about. 3 weeks into being at GE, my manager told me this jokingly, but this clearly happened. He said, somebody pulled him aside and said, you know, I don't think Mike's going to make it. I don't think Mike's going to last here. And he said, why? He said, well, have you seen the guy's socks? Seriously, that was the reason. Not tech skills, not can I do the job. Have you seen my socks? That's what I mean when I say weirdness quotient. Every company has things like that, which will mean like some people fit and some people don't, right? And the problem is, this is where we stray into the problem that this industry has far too much on the other side, where people think about fit, and their definition of fit is everybody who looks and acts exactly like me, right? And we get into the diversity conversation. I am actually arguing the point here is you should think about the diversity you need. You should be thinking explicitly, what diverse things about the people I'm bringing in will add to my organization, right? What is their background? If I hire a whole team of PhDs from MIT, that's going to be very different than if I hire a bunch of people out of a coding boot camp in San Francisco who are self-taught and have learned, you know, by being scrappy. Those are two totally different teams. In some organizations, I want a whole bunch of MIT PhDs because that fits that organization. In some organizations, that's insane. And so it's up to us as managers and leaders to think that through and to try and create a situation where we are able to hire exactly the people that we want to hire. So here's my other rule of thumb, and I could talk about this for an hour, but it is a simple concept and we all screw it up, me included. It is always better to say no to a good hire than it is to make one bad hire. Always, 100% of the time. By the way, humans aren't wired like that. You are not wired to have a candidate that almost fits and go, oh, I'll wait till the next one, right? We all want to close our recs. We all want to move quickly. We all want to round up relationship. The relationship expert Dan Savage likes to say, we take our partners and instead of them being the one, we round them up from a 0.9, right? The problem is when you're hiring, the research shows, HR people have done a lot of research, and the research shows that in general, a bad hire costs you exactly 1.5 to 2 times that person's salary. That is in lost opportunity costs, the amount of time you take training them, the amount of time that you actually have to spend firing them and managing them out of the organization, the things you didn't get to do because they were a distraction on your team. The average is, so if you're hiring a $150,000 engineer and you make that mistake, you immediately incur a $300,000 bill before you hire the next replacement. It is always better not to hire to make the bad hire. And so you have to move as quickly as you can, and you want to hire as fast as possible, but at the same time, you absolutely have to be thinking about how do I create a where I am able to do that. Now, literally just a quick digression, because I really want to get into conversations, and it's about development. So everything I've said here is about how to live in a world of attrition. But how do we keep people from attriting in the first place? The answer is development. The answer is you must be committed to actually making your people better. And that doesn't just mean with money. Like a lot of us think, especially around here, a lot of us think that commitment means I'm going to send you to every Black Hat, DEF CON, CanSec West, Recon, et cetera, around the world, and you're going to spend 26 weeks a year at conferences. That's not what I mean. What? What? I mean, I would love that. I would like that job too. But what I actually mean is you have to be thinking about how are you constantly causing your organization to learn and grow? And how are you setting them up for 3 years from now when they want to have that new set of skills? How are you getting them there? And this is an entire org effort, right? What it comes down to is not just do I send people to conferences. My team, I think we have 11 or 12 people here this week of the 35 or 40 in my organization. That I would have loved to bring everybody, but we're going to take those people who came here, and they're all going back, and they all have responsibilities, and they all already know what they are, to be teaching internally at town halls and internal all hands for the next few months, right? Everybody who comes here comes back to the organization and then trains, even the junior people, even the people who are here because it's their first time at Black Hat and DEF CON. I expect them to come back and teach. At the same time, it's funny, I was talking to Kathleen earlier, and I'm really excited about her talk later this afternoon, because our company actually has a really great policy of volunteer time off, right? Where we actually give people time off to volunteer. I didn't tell you this, but this should be interesting. I don't remember in the 2.5 years that I've been there that anyone ever asked to use their VTO to volunteer at a conference. And I would absolutely approve it, right? Because volunteering here is just as powerful and an opportunity to help the world and the community as volunteering anywhere else. And not only that, you learn stuff, right? You can't volunteer here without meeting all of you. This is where networks happen, even just by osmosis. The hallway talks, I learned stuff. Just hearing what people are talking about at dinner. Volunteering at conferences is a huge opportunity, and many companies have policies around volunteer time off that I bet, actually, how many of your companies have a policy on VTO? How many of you have ever used it to volunteer at a security conference? Do you see the difference, right? Like half the room and 2 hands. But that's the kind of thing that we need to be encouraging our teams to do, encouraging our people to do, to get out there, to use the resources they have so that we can keep growing them in this industry that requires constant growth. Because the other side to this, right? The other side to this, we evolve every 3 years, is as a manager, if 3 years from now my people haven't learned the skills that are going to be relevant that day, then what do I have to do? Well, I hope I don't have to fire them, but at the very least, I have to go get new people. And then I'm back in that attrition, hiring, all of that all over again. And the hiring treadmill never stops. The best way to stop the hiring treadmill is to turn the people you have into the people you need, right? Much easier, but takes a lot of commitment. And actually, you said something wonderful to me that I don't remember who you said it, that somebody's manager said, what do you think I'm doing, paying you to go to conferences? And I looked at her and went, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. That is absolutely what I'm doing, because that's the only way that 3 years from now, those people are still going to be useful for me and part of my org and be able to teach those skills to everybody on my team. And it's something that we all have to commit to, because we're self-selecting by being here, but ultimately being here year after year, that all of you who have been in this industry more than 10 years, is this the first Black Hat DEF CON for any of you? Of course not, right? How about B-Sides? Yeah, a couple of you, it's first B-Sides. But I guarantee you, even that, it's not your first security conference, right? We are a learning industry, and we have to keep that going, and especially, we have to teach the young people. So with that, I said I would only talk for 30, I talked for 40. Let's turn it open to questions. Do I need to pass the mic around?
I'll do it.
Oh, thank you.
I can be your Vanna White.
Okay.
What Mike is referring to is my talk that's at this afternoon is I've been noticing over the last 5, 8 years that I've been in the community that people use volunteering as just a way to get out in the community, but they're not looking at it from a career development lens, and companies are not looking at it from a technical and non-technical skills management lens. So I actually did a survey over the last 3 months within the community, nationally and internationally, asking people, do they volunteer? Does their company support it? What are the skills that they have learned? If they would move to another company, if the company provided more support. And we'll be releasing some of that data this afternoon, and then we just got accepted for DerbyCon, so the full community survey will come out at that time. So if you're around at 3 o'clock, we have a panel of people who have used community volunteering as a way to develop their career and how their company supports them and how they negotiate with their company to do that. And enough of the commercial for my talk later. Questions?
It's a great talk. I'm really excited about it. So.
Yeah, it will be taped.
Hi, so if I could summarize your talk into 3 phases. You've got recruit, run, and retain.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so across those 3 categories, with the differences in management styles you're advocating here, where do you see managers encountering the most friction with the rest of their organization, and what strategies and tips would you have for them to overcome them?
Great question. Really great question. It depends, and I hate to give the it depends answer, but it totally depends, right? Every org is different. So when I was at GE, I thought I was going to have the biggest issues with the recruit part, and HR was incredibly willing to just go to do whatever we needed. And I thought that was going to be the fight, and it turned out that the fight was actually about training and some of the other things. At the startup I'm at, actually, I would have thought the recruiting stuff would be easier. I've had a partially just because we're in many offices and we're across multiple cultures and we have a lot of other challenges. I have a harder challenge on the recruit situation there, so I spend more time working on recruit. I think it's a matter of, for each of those orgs, you've got to understand the culture, and you've got to understand every org that I've ever been in has had some things that don't move and some things that do, right? I mean, it's just like hacking. Some rules can be broken, some rules can be bent, and some can't at all. And for each org, you have to figure it out independently. Because I don't think there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all. In the managers I meet, though, I actually think recruiting is the hardest part, because we don't check our unconscious bias. Heck, I've interviewed conservatively 1,500 people in my career, and I still fall victim to all of these things. I'll still walk into an interview and think, wow, this person's awesome, and they haven't said a word yet. All right? And it's just a human response. And so until you're aware of that and you're really willing to be rigorous and just almost beat yourself up every time you have an opinion with no justification, and none of us are good at that. We all do that, right? We all judge books by their cover just naturally. It's why it's a cliche. And so I think in terms of actual individual skills, that's the hardest. It's the hardest one to learn.
So next question, Mike, you keep playing with your microphone.
It's because it keeps going out here, and I don't know if you guys can hear me. So yeah. I'm just trying to look like Britney Spears is really what it comes down to.
There you go.
Ah, perfect. Thank you. Now maybe you guys will be able to hear me. I won't sound like I'm fading in and out.
Thank you for the great talk. I think the best I've heard so far today.
Well, it is only 10 a.m.
High bar. So many questions come to mind. Have you read First Break All the Rules, and what do you think?
Of course. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. There's a lot of that in there. And actually, I had a slide on strengths and weaknesses earlier, but as I told Kathleen, I rewrote it. That was in my original deck. So did you want to tell them what it is, or do you want me to?
I mean, I did see some things that reminded me of that. I was just wondering if there was...
Yeah, there's definitely some Buckingham influence here.
Yeah, okay. And it's great. I recommend it as a read. There's a lot of research behind it, and it gives some paradigms that I think are helpful for hiring for the weirdness. I think you kind of alluded to there, and understanding what the job description is as well, and not just what are the skills you're hiring for, but what are the talents, what are what's the innate nature of the person who's going to be successful in this job.
Yeah.
But I think my question though is related to so there is some value that I feel I get out of my intuition, and I find I've studied myself in this area, and I have found that when I disregard my intuition and I take it completely out of the hiring process, I am more likely to fail. And that perhaps speaks to the inadequacy of the rest of my hiring process.
I disagree. I think you're right.
Okay.
Intuition is not the same as unconscious bias.
Okay. Great. So I feel like it's the onus is on me to take my intuition out of the realm of unconscious competence into conscious competence, and understand why that intuition is working for me, and the ways where it may not be, if that is the case. I just was wondering if you thought that was a valid consideration.
So let me just so we just had a lot of shorthand in that conversation. Let me just actually restate a few of those things for everybody. But you're doing it exactly right as far as I'm concerned. That was one of the most insightful takes on this whole process that I have heard. But it's especially the best one I've heard this morning. All right. So quick references. The book that she was referring to is called First Break All the Rules. There's another one called something about playing to your strengths. They're both written by a guy named Marcus Buckingham, who has written some of the best things on this. And Buckingham actually, they did this incredible study at Gallup, and what they found was that the most likely things in developing career for people that were successful, and we had to throw it on our head a little bit. Up until about 15 years ago, everybody viewed management as, let me look at, and your annual performance review probably still looks like this. You go in, you hear a couple of nice things, and then there's this whole list of things you suck at, and we'll call them areas for improvement, but really, it's a whole bunch of things you suck at, and then there's a plan for you to not suck at those things anymore, right? And we spend all our time talking about what we're bad at and getting better. And Buckingham actually did this incredible study, and what he found was the people who are successful don't spend their time working on their weaknesses. They spend their time making them stronger at the things they're already good at, right? You have a superpower that is uniquely you, right? The things that you are just naturally good at, that really come through, that you can offer to an organization better than anyone else. And if you work on being better at that, you are more likely to be better than if you work on trying to be, to be less bad at something else. It's sort of like, I don't know how many of you guys are basketball fans, but if you think about like Steph Curry, I don't think Steph Curry spends a lot of time working on like 360 windmill dunks, right? He works on shooting three-pointers. He's already the best three-point shooter in the history of basketball, and he gets better at it every year. He doesn't spend his time working on becoming Michael Jordan or working on becoming LeBron James. He spends his time working on being better at being Steph Curry. That's what Buckingham was talking about. Now, to the intuition thing, you cannot, so everything you said was so right on that I'm just going to restate it so that everyone hears it, because it's incredibly important. If you've been doing this for a while, you get intuitions. It's not the same as making the unconscious decision up front. And the goal of a really good interview process, and if you get really good at this, what you will find is I have an intuition about somebody. How do I, on the fly, then structure a question to confirm or deny that intuition in real life, right? It's not about just pretending that you don't have experience. Like anybody who's been managing for as long as many of us have, you can tell a lot of things unconsciously. And if you guys have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, there's a lot about how much we know quickly. The problem is that often gets mixed up. Like that's not a high fidelity signal usually, because it's mixed up with it's mixed up with, did I eat breakfast this morning and am I hangry? Right? So your goal has to be to take that, figure out what that intuition is telling you, and then figure out what questions to ask to figure out if you're the one that's wrong or if the intuition's right. And I think that's what you were saying at the end. And really, that was wonderful. So thank you for offering that, because that was great. Yeah, go for it.
So you gave a great talk on management direction. And there's enough of us in here who are managed versus managers. And because of the situation that all the managers are in, what advice would you give to the employees who have to switch jobs every once in a while because they're no longer a great fit for their company? Obviously, get training, study, yes, but managing the job interview process, managing the fact that the job description doesn't necessarily match the job, what advice would you give us? Because I'm sure you've got plenty.
No, that. Oh, yeah, actually, it's funny because I was actually just about to call you out. So go for it.
How can managed become better managers of their managers?
Yeah, managing up.
Yeah. Are we on that thing today?
Yeah, we totally are on that thing today. So actually, managing up is one of the biggest challenges. And one of the hardest things for most of us, is that we enter into a very strange relationship with our managers. Many of us, and this is a pattern I've noticed across most people, we relate to our management almost like they're our parents a lot of the time. And so we go into the relationship as though they are immovable, and much like our parents, they told us what to do and we didn't really have much say in it, right? And we still treat our managers that way. And to me, I'm looking into the camera for this. If anybody on my team thinks I'm not doing this, send me a Slack message and call me out, because I fail at this too. But as a manager, you have to be willing to be partners with the people on your team. And if you are, then managing up is easy, right? I don't view my team as working for me. I have management skills. This is what I've cultivated. I will tell you, I'm the worst reverse engineer on our team of malware reverse engineers. I haven't opened IDA in 5 years. They're better at that than I am, and they should be. And if they're not, we've got a problem, because if I'm the best reverse engineer, we are in deep trouble. And I know that, so I know that my role is not to be above them in some way. It's to use my skills the same way their job is to use their skills, and we're partners in this, right? And if I can view it that way, then you being able to come to me and say, hey, Mike, I need this, or hey, Mike, you're not doing that, then we can actually have a conversation. That makes it easy. Now, the hard part is that not that many of us, especially as if you read older management books, were raised in that culture. And some managers are not as open to that, especially the autocratic folks. And I see lots of nods in the room. We've all had that manager. And in that situation, my only advice is strong understanding of economics. So economics is known as the study of incentives. What are your manager's incentives? What do they want? And what do they want is usually not what they tell you, right? If I go to my team and I say, hey, I need you to do X, Y, Z, it's not because I really want that. It's because I want something else. Does anybody know the Toyota system of what's called the 5 whys in the quality system? Where you ask why 5 times and eventually, like after you've asked why the 5th time, you have the real answer. Figuring out what your manager wants is really a 5 whys exercise. And if you can get to, oh, they want to look good in front of their boss. They want to get promoted. And so they think that whatever they just asked you for will get them promoted. They want public recognition, or they don't want public recognition. They want private recognition. You have to figure out what your manager wants, and then how do I structure whatever I'm doing to help them achieve that goal? And if I can do that, then my manager's happy, and I'm probably successful. Now, the hard part of that, and I don't have a good answer for this, because this is where management and the manager-employee relationship is a relationship. The problem is if the manager wants something and you fundamentally can't give it to them, right? In divorce proceedings, that's called irreconcilable differences. And it generally leads to a divorce. And the whole thing is you got to hope that you can do that divorce as amicably as possible and do it with as little collateral damage as possible. But sometimes that's the only answer. All right, I'm getting the hook from the back, but seriously, thank you all for coming and listening.
Thank you, Mike.